I'm Crystal Oakwood, 34, and I built a logistics tech company from scratch after growing up with nothing. For years, I backed my brother, covered his rent, gave him jobs, even helped his wife's family land a $40M contract. But when they sat me in the kitchen at his wedding like I was hired help, I made a call that changed everything. Ever been dismissed by the very people you held up? Drop your story in the comments, you're not alone. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to draw the line with someone you loved, hit like and subscribe. What happened next, you won't see coming. My name is Crystal Oakwood, and if you had asked me 10 years ago what loyalty meant, I would have said, family first, no matter what. I was raised on that idea. My older brother, Darius, and I grew up in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, sharing a bunk bed and stale cereal most mornings. Our parents worked long hours, Dad drove a cab, Mom stitched wedding gowns at a boutique in Midtown. We learned early how to stretch a dollar, how to keep our heads down, and how to fend for ourselves when things got tight. But through it all, Darius and I were inseparable. He was 4 years older, loud, confident, a natural charmer. I was the quiet one, always reading, always planning. He called me the brain and used to say, "You'll make us rich someday." I believed him. Darius wasn't great in school. He got by mostly on personality and luck, and when that ran out, he drifted. One year it was real estate, then a bartending phase, then something with cryptocurrency that cost him nearly everything he had. Each time he failed, he'd show up at my door with a sheepish grin and an apology. And each time, I let him in. By the time I was 29, I'd founded a tech logistics startup with 2 former classmates. It started small, streamlining warehouse inventory through AI-driven demand forecasting, but we hit our stride when a major regional distributor took a chance on our platform. I remember the night we got the contract. I called Darius first. He came over with a bottle of cheap champagne, and we drank it out of coffee mugs on my balcony. "You did it, Jules," he said. "Told you were the one." I didn't know then how much I'd cling to that moment later. When we expanded operations, I brought Darius on as a consultant. It wasn't a formal hire, he didn't have the credentials or the consistency, but I carved out a temporary advisory role so he could make enough to cover rent and chip away at his credit card debt. I rewrote part of the contract language myself so it would accommodate someone without a college degree. I even floated his name in meetings, spun his ideas to sound more polished, more technical than they actually were. To my team, I said he was strategically useful. To myself, I said, he's family. I didn't stop there. When Darius met Eloise at a networking mixer, I was the one who introduced them. She was working in corporate branding then, fresh out of a rotational program at one of the Big 4 firms. Smart, sharp, and ambitious. I liked her. I even offered to review her pitch deck when she was launching her own branding consultancy. Introduced her to 2 of my investor contacts who were building portfolios focused on minority-led creative agencies. They ended up backing her first big campaign. She never said thank you, not directly, but I chalked it up to nerves. Maybe she didn't know how much I'd helped behind the scenes. They started dating seriously a few months later. When they got engaged, Darius called me from the airport during a layover. She said yes, he told me, out of breath and giddy. "You're going to love the ring. It cost more than my car." I congratulated him and wired him $2,000 the next day to help with the deposit on the venue. He never brought it up again. For a while, I kept giving without thinking. Paid off the rest of Darius's old student loans. He defaulted twice, and it was starting to affect my company's vendor credit lines. When Eloise needed rebranding support for a client in the logistics sector, I gave her access to our in-house analytics to strengthen her proposal. I never shared proprietary data, but it was enough to make her look good. "You're a lifesaver," she said once, her tone breezy, like I'd just lent her a stapler. "I owe you lunch." But something shifted the year before the wedding. Eloise stopped using my name in conversations. I noticed it first at a family dinner when she referred to me as Darius's sister, while describing a photo she wanted for their wedding website. She corrected herself halfway through, but the moment stuck with me. Later, she emailed a thank you note to my executive assistant after I connected her to a shipping startup that eventually became a recurring client. She never copied me on the thread. Darius, too, had started drifting. He bailed on 2 of our scheduled project calls and eventually told me he was pursuing new advisory opportunities. I translated that as, "Eloise doesn't want me working for you anymore." He said it was nothing personal, just a shift in priorities. Around that time, I noticed he'd started talking about our childhood differently, recasting it. We all had it rough, he told a friend of Eloise's at an engagement brunch. But I was the one taking care of things when our parents were working. Crystal had her head in the clouds. The same friend later asked me if it was true I'd only gotten into Columbia because of a minority scholarship. I remember smiling and saying, "No, I got in because I was valedictorian. The scholarship just helped with tuition." She blinked, nodded slowly, and said, "Oh. Eloise made it sound like your brother really paved the way." It wasn't just the reframing that bothered me, it was how easily they did it. How natural it seemed for them to take credit, minimize, sideline. And how quickly everyone else bought in. The guest list for the wedding came out 6 weeks before the date. I RSVP'd online, choosing the chicken option and marking that I'd be arriving alone. A few days later, I received a confirmation email with seating assignments. My name was listed under vendors and overflow. I thought it was a mistake at first. I texted Darius, made a joke about needing a red apron and name tag. He replied 3 hours later with a thumbs up emoji. Still, I showed up. Because that's what you do when it's family. You show up. Even when they don't see you anymore. Even when they've rewritten the story and you no longer have a name, just a function. I wore a simple navy dress and low heels. Brought a gift, too, a donation to their honeymoon fund and a rare first edition of a book Darius and I used to read as kids. I had it rebound in leather and inscribed. It said, "For the one who always said I'd make it." I did, Jules. I never saw the book again. Later, I found out it had been left in a pile of unwrapped gifts behind the catering hall's side entrance. That was the night I was directed to the kitchen to eat. And that was the moment something in me went quiet. Then sharp. Then clear. When Eloise and Darius got engaged, I expected things to get a little more formal, schedules, planning, guest lists. What I didn't expect was to start feeling like a stranger in my own family. It started small. A weekend brunch I wasn't invited to, where Eloise posted photos of homemade waffles and mimosa towers with captions like, "Our little pre-wedding crew." Darius was in the background of every shot, his arms slung around her waist like he'd been molded to fit there. I saw the pictures while I was boarding a flight to San Diego for a logistics expo. I texted him a quick, "Looks fun. Hope you saved me a waffle." He didn't respond. A week later, I got an invite to a casual engagement mixer happening at Eloise's friend's condo in Williamsburg. It was addressed to Crystal Oakwood plus guest, even though Eloise had known for months that I was single. No note, no text, just the link. The RSVP options were yes, Lovebirds Unite, or no, Heartbreak Hotel. I selected no. Not because I was heartbroken. Because I was starting to feel like I was being given the message that I didn't belong. At least not in the polished little narrative Eloise was crafting around their relationship. Still, I kept trying. When their wedding website launched, I noticed the bridal party included Eloise's 3 sisters, 2 sorority friends, and her business bestie, someone I'd once introduced her to at a panel I hosted. Darius had 2 college roommates and a cousin we barely knew. I wasn't on the list. I told myself maybe they just didn't want to involve family directly. Maybe they wanted to keep things clean. I asked Darius about it over lunch one day. We met at a Thai place near his apartment, neutral territory. I ordered pad CEW. He barely touched his food. Noticed I didn't make the wedding party, I said lightly. He looked at his water glass. We just didn't want to mix family politics into the bridal side of things. I'm not asking to hold her veil, I said. It just felt like maybe, come on, Jules. Don't make this about you. The phrase landed harder than I expected. I didn't realize until then that I had, unconsciously, been waiting for some kind of recognition. A small acknowledgement that I'd been there, before Eloise, before the funding rounds, before any of it. But instead, I was being told to shrink down and get over it. Darius changed the subject after that. Asked how my latest pitch deck was going. Told me he'd heard my name come up in a Forbes article. Smiled like he was proud. And for a moment, I almost let it go. Then came the branding deal. One of Eloise's clients, a mid-size freight company pivoting into last-mile delivery, wanted analytics integration for their new campaign. Eloise reached out. Would love to loop in your dev team to help with visuals, she said in an email. Just simple data viz, nothing proprietary. I agreed, assigning 2 of my junior developers to mock up an anonymized dashboard. We gave her polished visuals, complete with timelines, user behavior predictions, and a breakdown of fulfillment delays. Her client loved it. She never sent a thank you. Not to me. Not to my team. But 3 weeks later, I got a forwarded message from one of the developers. Eloise had posted the final presentation online with the caption, "Big win for our analytics-forward branding model. All in-house." My company's watermark had been cropped out. I forwarded the post to Darius with a short note, curious how this became in-house. He replied, "Don't start this again." That was the second time he'd used that phrase. The first had been after I questioned why I wasn't included in the engagement shoot. Eloise had asked a former Vogue intern to style their photos in postmodern pastel, whatever that meant. The pictures went viral in their circle. Darius wore a cream linen suit. Eloise had on a floor-length blush dress with a sheer cape. She captioned it, "Built a life I don't need a vacation from." The comment section exploded. People used words like power couple, aspirational, branding royalty. Not one photo included a family member. I didn't recognize most of the people tagged. Still, I made excuses. They're young. They're building something. Maybe I'm too close, too familiar. Maybe they're just trying to craft an image that works better with strangers. But then Darius stopped returning my calls. It wasn't abrupt. Just gradual. He'd say he was busy, push our dinners back, then forget entirely. When we did speak, he sounded distracted, like he was squeezing me into a break between strategy calls. I used to know everything, his deadlines, his projects, even when his credit card bill was due. Now, I was lucky to get a text update once a week. And when I did hear from him, the language had changed. I'm trying to position us as a premium brand. Eloise thinks I need to start aligning with people on my level. She says I come off too blue-collar around certain crowds. Us. Aligning. Position. These weren't words he used to use with me. They weren't his words, honestly. They were Eloise's. At a family barbecue 3 months before the wedding, I watched as Eloise greeted my parents like she was already the matriarch. She complimented my mother's cooking with the tone of someone visiting a cultural exhibit. "So authentic," she said, smiling with her eyes wide. I love how real this all feels. Darius stood next to her in a pale pink polo shirt, sunglasses pushed up on his head. When I walked over with a plate of skewers, Eloise blinked and smiled like she hadn't expected to see me there. "I didn't know you were coming," she said, sipping a hard seltzer. "I wasn't sure I could make it," I said. "But I wrapped up a meeting early." She nodded, then turned to Darius. "We should go over the wine list later." He gave her a quick kiss on the cheek and followed her across the yard. He didn't say anything to me. After they left, my mother asked why I looked upset. I said I was just tired. There was one more moment that stuck with me, a meeting Eloise had with one of my investor contacts. She wanted to pitch him on a rebranding package for his e-commerce startup. I set up the introduction. Afterward, he called me and said, "She's sharp, but she talks like she owns your Rolodex." I paused. "What do you mean?" "She said you were happy to funnel her some of your overflow." I didn't reply, just thanked him for the feedback and hung up. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and made a list. Names. Numbers. What I had done for each of them. Darius's loan. Eloise's deck. The introductions. The rent. The first 10 clients they'd landed. The doors I'd opened that they had walked through without ever turning around to say thank you. I used to think giving was just what you did when you loved someone. That you didn't need to keep score if your intentions were good. But it's easy to confuse love with obligation when the people you give to stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a resource. I didn't want payback. Not yet. but I started to pay attention. Closely. Because something in me had shifted. Quietly, but permanently. And I knew the next time I was asked to show up, I'd be ready to decide whether or not I wanted to. The wedding was held at a renovated vineyard outside Hudson, one of those venues with stone fountains and curated wildflowers that look effortless until you see the six-figure invoice. I flew in 2 days early, stayed at a quiet boutique hotel 15 minutes away, and sent a Venmo transfer to Darius that morning to cover the remainder of the reception hall deposit. I didn't mention it to anyone. He'd asked quietly weeks before, after some budgeting mishap with Eloise's floral designer. I hate to ask, he'd said. Just until we get the honeymoon gift money in. I didn't hesitate. It wasn't the first time. And I assumed it wouldn't be the last. The morning of the wedding, I arrived early in a navy dress I'd had altered the week before. Subtle jewelry, low heels, my hair in a clean bun. I figured I'd help where I could, keep a low profile, and stay until the end out of respect. I didn't expect gratitude, but I did expect basic dignity. The venue manager greeted me at the entrance, scanning the guest list on her iPad. She paused when I gave her my name. "You're not on the primary seating chart," she said, frowning. "Let me check with the coordinator." A few minutes later, a younger woman in a headset and clipboard approached. "Oh yeah, Crystal Oakwood?" She smiled brightly, too brightly. "You're with the overflow. Kitchen entrance is around the side. That's where the vendors and helpers go." I stared at her. "I'm not a vendor." She blinked. "It says non-essential family next to your name. That's usually for background support." I didn't move. The woman shifted slightly, eyes flicking to the line building behind me. "If there's been a mistake, I'm sure we can work it out after the ceremony." I stepped aside, out of the way of the guests arriving behind me, some dressed like Fashion Week, others already half-drunk from the shuttle ride over. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my messages. No apology. No correction. Just the original invite and the RSVP confirmation marked received. I walked around the side entrance. The kitchen was bright and industrial, exposed steel shelving, trays of canapés lined up under heat lamps. There was a table tucked near the back where 3 junior staffers sat eating sandwiches in silence. A woman in a white apron looked up and said, "You lost." I shook my head. Apparently not. I found a chair near the back wall and sat down, phone in hand, bag still clutched on my lap. Through the swinging door, I could hear the distant thrum of string instruments. The ceremony was starting. I didn't get up. 30 minutes later, someone pushed through the door and held it for a group of guests trailing in from the reception hall. The ceremony had ended. Cocktail hour had begun. I recognized a few of the faces, investors I'd introduced Eloise to, former colleagues of Darius's. I stayed where I was. Then I saw her. Eloise walked through the kitchen like it was an extension of the venue. She wore a fitted ivory gown with illusion sleeves and a glittering belt. Her hair was pinned back in an elaborate twist. She was flanked by her 2 sisters, both carrying flutes of champagne. She stopped when she saw me. "Oh," she said, raising her glass. "I didn't realize you'd already eaten." I looked up, not speaking. She smiled. "The maid eats in the kitchen, right?" One of her sisters laughed, too loudly. The other smirked and looked away. Eloise turned and walked off, heels clicking against the tile. I didn't move. Not because I was stunned, but because I needed to stay still long enough to keep from doing something I couldn't take back. Darius followed minutes later. He paused at the kitchen door, scanned the room, then spotted me. For a moment, he just stood there, hands in his pockets, gaze fixed but unreadable. I waited for him to say something. Anything. He didn't. He looked down, shifted his weight, then turned and walked away. I felt the quiet of that gesture more than any insult Eloise could have thrown. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even shame. It was absence. The kind you don't recover from. The rest of the night blurred. I sat through the toasts, streaming them on my phone from the venue's public YouTube link. Eloise's father gave a long speech about legacy and partnership. Darius thanked his network and said the phrase, "marrying up" twice. There was no mention of me. Not as a sister, not as family. Not even as a guest. When the first dance began, I stepped outside and stood near the loading dock. The evening was cool. I took off my heels and sat on the concrete steps, checking email like it was any other Friday. At 9:13 p.m., my COO texted me a project update. Redline's quarterly numbers are in. Low margin, higher churn. Want me to schedule a review? I stared at the screen. Redline Imports. Eloise's father's company. The one I'd vouched for when they were struggling. The one we'd signed a $40 million contract with 2 years prior, despite better offers, because I said they'd come through. Because I wanted to support Darius's future in-laws. Because I thought that counted for something. I typed one sentence back. Hold all renewals. Then I slipped my phone back into my purse, put on my shoes, and walked out without saying goodbye. No one stopped me. No one noticed. Outside, a valet offered to call a car. I declined. I drove myself back to the hotel in silence, hands steady on the wheel, not because I wasn't angry, but because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't confused. They'd told me who I was to them, and I'd finally decided to believe them. The kitchen door swung shut behind me with a soft clatter. I found a quieter corner in the back hallway, near a stack of folded chairs and catering bins. The noise from the reception faded, just faint music now, clinking glasses, muffled laughter. I pulled out my phone and called Daniel, my COO. He answered on the second ring. Hey, Jules. Everything okay? Pause all renewals with Redline Imports, I said. Don't tell them why. Just hold everything. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then, copy. For how long? Until further notice. I could hear him shifting in his office chair, probably pulling up the account file. You sure? I'm sure. Another pause, then, understood. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my purse. My hands were shaking, not from nerves, but from the sudden clarity that always comes after you stop making excuses for other people. For years, I'd spun Darius's flakiness as charm, framed Eloise's opportunism as ambition. I had diluted every red flag until it was pink enough to dismiss. I walked back through the side entrance, past the caterers plating dessert. No one noticed me. No one asked if I was coming back to the reception. I kept going. The hotel bar was mostly empty when I got there. A couple in their 50s sat near the window arguing about which highway to take in the morning. A man in a tuxedo scrolled through his phone 2 seats down from where I landed. I ordered a bourbon neat and slid onto the leather stool like it was muscle memory. The first sip burned. The second didn't. I stared at the glass and thought about the day I pushed the Redline contract through. At the time, they weren't the most qualified vendor. Their warehousing system was outdated. Their regional tracking wasn't automated. But Eloise's father made a promise. Multiple upgrades over the next 2 quarters, a tech integration lead willing to collaborate with our software team, and pricing that undercut the competition. The numbers weren't ideal, but I vouched for them in front of the board. It's a trust move, I told Daniel afterward. We get in early, they grow, and we lock in preferred terms. He'd nodded, skeptical but loyal. You sure about this guy? He's family, I'd said. I finished the drink and signaled for another. The bartender raised an eyebrow. I nodded once. That second bourbon took me further back, to the first time I covered Darius's rent. He was 27. I'd just gotten my second promotion, still living out of a tiny studio apartment with exposed brick and a leaky radiator. He showed up outside my building with a duffel bag and a story about a startup collapse that turned out to be mostly his own negligence. I let him stay on my couch for 2 months. Gave him cash to bridge the gap. Coached him through job interviews. He got hired eventually. Not through merit, but because I called someone I'd interned for 6 years earlier and asked for a favor. He didn't thank me. Not really. He brought home a pizza that first week and said, "We're even now, right?" I said yes. I lied. Over the years, I kept making those trades. Time for silence. Money for proximity. Loyalty for illusion. I thought showing up for someone was its own reward. That if you gave enough, gave steadily, without needing a return, it would be understood. Respected. Maybe even reciprocated. But that night, watching Eloise hold court at her wedding like a hostess at a gala she bought her way into, and seeing Darius choose that silence over me, it hit different. He didn't forget I was there. He chose to act like I wasn't. At some point, the bar started filling up. Late arrivals from another event. The noise rose, a low hum of overlapping conversations and music from someone's phone on the other side of the room. I stayed. I thought about the list I'd made a few weeks earlier, sitting alone in my apartment with a spreadsheet open. I'd titled it Contributions like it was a grant proposal. I listed everything I'd done for them: Darius, Eloise, Redline, itemized like expenses. 17 professional favors. 4 financial transfers. 3 vendor referrals. 1 contract worth $40 million. And for what? A chair in the kitchen and a joke at my expense. No one owed me a parade. I didn't expect a toast or a spotlight. But I had assumed, naively, that when the moment came, Darius would remember who helped carry him. Instead, he looked away. That was the part one kept turning over in my head. Not Eloise's cruelty. Not the planner's mistake. Not even the seating chart. Just that moment, his eyes meeting mine across the kitchen threshold, and the deliberate choice not to cross it. I left the bar around midnight, steady on my feet. The bourbon had worn off enough to give way to clarity. My hotel room was cold. I turned the thermostat up and lay on top of the covers, still in the same navy dress. I didn't sleep. At 6:10 a.m., I texted Daniel again. We'll be pulling the Redline contract by end of month. Start lining up replacements. He replied 3 minutes later. Understood. By 7, I was dressed and packed. I checked out without breakfast, got into my rental car, and started the drive back toward the city. The sky was a flat gray, the kind of weather that makes you feel like the whole day is holding its breath. Halfway down the Taconic, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. Then texted. Wonderful wedding. Eloise looked beautiful. Hope you got home safely. No mention of where I'd been seated. No mention of what she must have heard. I didn't reply. I pulled into the city just before 10 and drove straight to the office. The weekend team was there, 2 analysts and a project manager running a trial deployment for a new client in Seattle. They looked up when I walked in. Everything okay? One of them asked. Yeah, I said, setting my bag down. Just needed to be here. I spent the next 4 hours reviewing vendor data, identifying gaps Redline had left open, and drafting a phased exit plan. By Monday, I'd briefed legal. By Wednesday, Redline's executive team received notice of contract termination pending a 90-day wind down. Eloise's father called that night. I didn't answer. Darius texted the next morning. Can we talk? I put the phone face down on my desk. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. Monday morning, I got to the office before anyone else. The floor was still quiet, just the hum of the HVAC and the faint click of my heels across the tile. I unlocked my glass-walled corner office, set my bag down, and took a minute to look out over the skyline. The city felt still, like it was waiting for something. Or maybe I was. Daniel showed up around 8:10. He knocked once and stepped in. You sure? I nodded. We're pulling the contract. All of it. He gave a small exhale, not surprised. They'll fight. They'll lose. By 9 o'clock, our legal team had the draft termination notice ready. By 11:15, Redline's executive team received it, clean, precise, and well within the terms of the original agreement. 90-day wind down. Full accountability transfer. No room for negotiation. At 1:07 p.m., my direct line rang. Crystal, came the voice on the other end, sharp, rehearsed. Eloise's father. I assume this is some kind of mistake. No, I said. It's not. You're pulling a $40 million contract without cause? There's cause, I said. We've documented 7 unmet benchmarks for late-cycle deliveries and 2 support gaps in the last quarter alone. You mean the same issues you overlooked for 2 years? I didn't overlook anything, I said. I vouched for a future you didn't deliver. He paused, recalibrating. You're making this personal. I know. His breath caught. Is this about the wedding? It's about the pattern. There was a long silence. Then, do you have any idea what kind of damage this will do to our operation? I do. Crystal, you're smarter than this. You don't want to make enemies in this industry. I leaned back in my chair, steady. Then you should have treated your allies better. He hung up without another word. I expected the next call, but it still made my jaw tighten when I saw Darius's name on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. Hey, he said, soft, like we were just picking up from a missed lunch. So, you pulled the red line contract. Yes. There was a beat of disbelief. I thought you were just pausing it. I thought, no, I said. You didn't think. You assumed I'd eat it like I always do. He sighed. Jules, come on. We're family. We can't let this spiral. You already did. Look, he said, his tone slipping into that coaxing register he used whenever he wanted something. I know Eloise can be sharp. She jokes sometimes, she pushes things too far. But this is serious. You're right, I said. It is. You're being emotional, he said finally. This is business. We should talk it out like adults. I felt something settle in me. Not anger, not pain. Just a clarity so sharp it could cut glass. Adults, I repeated. Don't seat their family in the kitchen. He went quiet. You knew, I said. You saw me. You heard her. And you let it happen. It was Eloise's call. I didn't want to cause drama on the day. You didn't want to cause discomfort, I corrected. Not for her. Not for your image. But you were fine letting me sit behind a prep station like I was staff. Jules, I'm not mad anymore, I said. I'm just done. I hung up. He didn't call back. That week, I briefed our team on the transition plan. We started vetting vendors with scalable logistics and cleaner records. A shortlist was built by Friday. By the following Tuesday, we'd signed a letter of intent with a new partner. The shift would take 90 days to finalize, but the press release went out immediately. The response was swift. Eloise's father emailed a vague, passive-aggressive statement about disruption and changing relationships in the space. He tried to float rumors about internal disputes on our side, but they didn't stick. My reputation was clean. His wasn't. A few days later, one of Eloise's former clients emailed me. Heard you dropped Redline. Bold move. Thinking of doing the same. It wasn't a victory lap. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. But I didn't apologize either. A week after the termination notice, my mother called. Darius says you're pulling out of some business deal with Eloise's father, she began. That true? Yes. Well, she said slowly, he's pretty upset. Says you're taking things too far. I'm doing what I should have done a year ago. There was a pause. You know, you kids, everything's always so extreme with you. One thing goes wrong and suddenly it's war. It wasn't one thing, Mom. I just don't want to see you two destroy your relationship over some seating mix-up. It wasn't a mix-up. More silence. I raised you both to stick together, she said finally. You've always been the strong one. Maybe you can be the bigger person here. I've been the bigger person my entire life, I said. And all it got me was a folding chair behind a warming tray. She didn't respond. I didn't fill the silence. We ended the call a few minutes later, polite but cold. That night, I went home, poured a glass of wine, and opened the old spreadsheet I'd made, the one listing every favor, introduction, and loan. I added 2 new entries. Line 18, contract termination notice. Line 19, silence. Finally I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be broken. The fallout came slowly. Redline stock dropped 8 points in a month. 2 key clients followed our lead and pulled out. A shipping delay made the rounds on LinkedIn. Eloise's father stepped down from the board by the end of the quarter. They spun it as a strategic retirement. Darius didn't call again. Neither did Eloise. But a package arrived at the office 2 weeks later. A small box with no return address. Inside was the first edition book I'd gifted them, clean, untouched, still in its wrapping. The note said nothing. I slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk without reading the inscription. It wasn't bitterness. It was closure. 3 months after the termination, Redline stock dipped hard, 9% in a single day after an earnings call exposed operational gaps they'd been papering over for years. The slide wasn't catastrophic, but it was loud enough to rattle their client base. Quiet enough for me not to be blamed outright. Publicly, we said nothing. Internally, our team moved fast. I'd already started conversations with VectorCore, a rising logistics firm out of Austin. Nimble, data native, and hungry. I floated the idea casually over lunch with their founder, said we were exploring more agile partners, and left it there. By the end of the week, they'd sent over a full proposal. My team ran the numbers. They weren't just better, they were cheaper, faster, and more transparent. We signed by the end of the month. Redline didn't see it coming. Their team reached out 3 times to try to schedule renegotiation talks. Legal responded with the standard closure clause and a copy of the signed disengagement. No explanation. No discussion. Darius texted me a week later. Heard about the new vendor. You really locked them out. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Without our business, Redline lost credibility in the mid-size sector. One of their junior partners, a guy I'd known peripherally through a conference circuit, forwarded me an internal memo Eloise's father had sent out, tightening budgets, freezing new hires, launching a transparency initiative. I didn't ask for it. He sent it anyway. The note included a line about exposure from recent contract shifts. I read it twice and then deleted it. Darius's side projects started drying up too. Without my name opening doors or backing his credentials, he had to pitch clean. No shortcuts. No introductions. A venture group he'd been courting backed out. Someone I used to mentor sat on their board. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, but she messaged me the day after the meeting. Didn't realize how much of that pitch used to come from your credibility. Makes sense now. I didn't reply. At networking events, mutual friends started tiptoeing around the topic. First it was questions, polite, vague, haven't seen Darius around lately. Everything okay? Then it turned into quiet acknowledgments. I used to think you were being harsh. Now I get it. One friend said it outright. You were right. We didn't see it before. But I didn't post about it. I didn't make it a narrative. No cryptic tweets. No pointed quotes. I didn't need the audience. The power wasn't in being loud, it was in being done. I focused forward. My company thrived. The partnership with VectorCore gave us deeper visibility and faster turnaround. Clients noticed. Our Q3 retention rate climbed. Our cost per fulfillment dropped 11%. Analysts flagged us as a logistics leader to watch in 2 trade journals. None of that made the headlines, but in the rooms that mattered, we were earning attention. Meanwhile, Eloise pivoted her agency's branding. More lifestyle clients, fewer corporate ones. The rebrand felt rushed. She pushed hard into personal visibility, panels, podcasts, styled photo shoots, but the numbers didn't move. A few of my contacts in PR whispered that she'd started to burn bridges. Over-promising. Overextending. Under-delivering. I watched it all unfold from a distance. Not with glee. Not even satisfaction. Just quiet observation, like tracking a weather pattern I'd already prepared for. There was one night, about 4 months after the wedding, when I ran into someone from that day. Evan, one of the photographers. Freelance, talented, a little awkward, but kind. He was covering a logistics tech mixer downtown. We ran into each other by the snack table. He blinked when he saw me. You look different. I raised an eyebrow. I mean, good different. Confident. He smiled, a little sheepish. I've seen a lot of weddings. That one? Yours was the only face that didn't match the room. I laughed once short. You're not wrong. He lowered his voice. That kitchen thing? I still think about it. I've never seen anything like it. I didn't answer right away. Just met his eyes and nodded once. He didn't push. Later that night, he emailed me a photo he hadn't shared publicly, a candid, black and white shot of me sitting in the kitchen, elbows on the table, face lit by my phone screen. Caught in the middle of that moment. Alone, composed. Detached. The subject line just said, "You didn't flinch." I saved it in a folder on my desktop I don't open often. Around that same time, my mother called again. It was a Saturday. She asked how work was going. Told me my uncle had mentioned reading something about my company in a newsletter. Then she said, Darius is having a hard time. I waited. He's been quiet lately. I think he's overwhelmed. Maybe even a little lost. Maybe he should talk to someone, I said. He used to talk to you. I didn't respond. She went on gently. You were always the one holding things together. That's the problem, I said. You got used to me doing that. She didn't argue. That surprised me. I just wish things were different, she said finally. So did I said. And then I stopped. We ended the call a few minutes later. She didn't bring it up again. The months kept moving. My team grew. I hired 2 new developers, expanded our analytics offerings, and started quietly mentoring a few founders through a nonprofit incubator. I got home earlier some nights. Cooked. Took long walks with no destination. Reread old books I hadn't touched since college. For the first time in years, my phone could go a full hour without needing me. There's a kind of freedom that comes when you stop forcing people to see you a certain way. When you let the gap widen, let them walk away if they want to. It doesn't hurt less, but it hurts cleaner. No tangled expectations. No wasted explanation. I didn't rebuild the bridge. I just made sure it couldn't be used again. It was 6 months after the wedding when Darius showed up at my office. No call. No email. No warning. Just him, standing in the lobby in a wrinkled button-down with 2 coffees and a look I hadn't seen in years. Tired. Not physically. Just worn down in the way people get when the scaffolding they've leaned on too long finally gives out. He didn't ask the receptionist if I was available. He just waited. Arms crossed. Eyes on the floor. Daniel came into my office. You've got someone downstairs. I didn't ask who. I already knew. I let him wait 10 more minutes before I buzzed the front desk. Send him up. He walked in slowly, holding one of the coffees out like a peace offering. I didn't take it. He sat without being invited. I was wrong, he said quietly. I didn't say anything. He looked around the office, like he was seeing it for the first time. Like he hadn't been here before. Which was mostly true. He used to meet me in cafes. Neutral places where things didn't stick. I thought I could keep Eloise's world and yours separate, he said. I thought it would be easier. It was easier, I said. For you. He nodded. She's gone. Filed for separation 2 months ago. Moved out last week. I didn't flinch. He laughed under his breath. I thought you'd say something. I don't celebrate people getting what they asked for, I said. Especially when they never stop to think about what it cost. He nodded again, slower this time. You were right. About her. About the way I let her talk to people. The way I let her talk to you. You didn't let her, I said. You stood beside her. That's different. He stared at his coffee cup, then set it down carefully on the corner of my desk. I should have stopped her. That night in the kitchen. I knew it was wrong. I felt sick watching it. But I kept thinking it would make things worse to say something. It did, I said. Just not for her. He exhaled, long and slow. I didn't come to fix anything. I know I can't. I raised an eyebrow. I just wanted to say it out loud. That I failed you. And I don't expect anything back. That was the first real thing he'd said in years. I didn't answer right away. I let the quiet sit. When I finally spoke, I didn't talk about Eloise. Or the wedding. Or the contract. I said, I'm not interested in apologies. He looked up at me confused. I'm interested in patterns. He sat back. Processing. I kept going. This isn't about one moment. It's about every time I protected you. Every time you let me. And the first time I needed you to do the same, you chose your comfort. He didn't argue. That was new. I'm not walking back through this with you, Darius, I said. But I'm also not slamming the door. I've just learned to keep it cracked. That's all. We sat there for another minute. I'd like to earn back your trust, he said finally. However long that takes. I nodded once. Then you'll need to start showing me who you are without me holding you up. He picked up the untouched coffee and stood. Thanks for letting me in. I didn't respond. Just turned back to my screen. He left quietly. I watched him walk to the elevator through the reflection in the glass. No bravado. No practice swagger. Just a man walking out of a room he knew he didn't belong in anymore. We didn't talk for 2 months after that. Then, one day, he texted me a photo. A flyer for a workshop he was running, free entrepreneurship classes at a community center in Queens. It looked simple. Underfunded. Honest. Not much, he wrote. But it's a start. I didn't reply. 2 weeks later, A mutual friend mentioned seeing him there. Said he looked different. Said he spoke like someone who had finally stopped trying to sound like someone else. I went once. Quietly. Sat in the back and didn't tell anyone I was coming. Watched him talk about small pivots and strategic choices. About failure. About resilience. He didn't name drop. Didn't mention me. Just did the work. We spoke again later that week. Short call. Civil. Now we talk maybe once a month. Usually on Sundays. Sometimes about business. Sometimes about nothing. He asks questions now. Listens without trying to fix. Doesn't ask for anything in return. I'm not interested in building something back the way it was. That version of us depended on me making myself smaller. That's not happening again. But I'll admit, I respect the effort. Trust doesn't get restored in a speech. It comes back in layers. In silences that don't sting. In gestures that don't demand reciprocation. In the absence of ego. I keep the door cracked. Not for him. For me. Because letting someone earn their way back is a kind of power too. One I had to learn the hard way. 2 years later, we rang the bell at the NYSE. I stood on the balcony next to Daniel, flanked by my senior team, half of whom weren't even with us back when we started negotiating the red line exit. The air was sharp, the lights bright, the applause louder than I expected. I smiled once for the cameras. Then I stepped back and let the others take the spotlight. They'd earned it. We closed strong that day. Better than projections. A few analysts even said our vertical had finally matured, as if we hadn't been grinding uphill for years while they looked the other way. I didn't correct them. I didn't have to. We were the ones who built the system. Quietly. Cleanly. Without shortcuts. Without noise. Darius texted me that night. Just one line. Proud of you. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. He knew. I'd seen him a few times since that day in my office. We were civil. Not close. There were stretches, months, where we didn't speak. But he didn't push. He never asked for more than I offered. And that, ironically, made space for something steadier to grow in the silence. Last I heard, he was working part-time at a nonprofit, helping small business owners apply for funding. No investor dinners. No staged photo shoots. Just work. I don't know if it fulfills him. I don't ask. Eloise divorced him last spring. The official story was irreconcilable differences. The unofficial one, passed around quietly at a few industry events, was that she blamed him for everything that fell apart after I pulled the contract. Said he didn't protect her legacy. Said he let the wrong people get too close. She never reached out to me. Not once. Not after the wedding. Not after red lines slipped below valuation. Not after her media company restructured. I saw her name in a press release last fall, attached to a boutique consulting firm. No profile photo. Just a bullet point list of services. I didn't feel satisfaction. Just distance. Some people implode. Others just fade. And either way, it's not my story to finish. As for me, I bought a townhouse in the West Village. It's quiet. Clean lines, high windows, nothing ornate. I kept the kitchen open plan, not because I cook, but because I like the light. I come home earlier these days. I don't bring my laptop to bed anymore. I let things wait until morning. Every so often, I get asked to speak at conferences. Female founder, they call it. Visionary CEO. I always laugh when I see the brochures. Not because they're wrong, but because the titles never touch the real story. Not the one that mattered. The real pivot wasn't about business. It was the moment I stopped giving people the benefit of the doubt when they showed me exactly who they were. It was the night I sat in a kitchen full of strangers and made a call that reshaped everything I'd built. People ask if I regret it. If I'd go back and handle it differently. If I miss Darius. If I miss the version of my family that used to include Sunday dinners and group texts and the illusion that blood meant bond. I don't. Because some lessons come quietly. Others show up dressed in lace, holding champagne, laughing as they strip you of your seat at the table. But that night in the kitchen, I remembered who I was. Not the helper. Not the fixer. Not the safety net. I was the builder. The closer. The reason they had anything to celebrate in the first place. I don't need gratitude. I don't even need recognition. What I need and what I kept was clarity. Boundaries, built not from resentment, but from truth. And peace, earned not from walking away, but from finally standing still while everyone else showed me what they were willing to lose to stay comfortable. My company's stronger than ever. Our stock is steady. Our people stay. Our clients grow. But none of that compares to what I got back when I reclaimed my own name. My own value. My own line in the sand. Some lessons cost millions. Some just cost a wedding dinner. And a brother. But the ones that matter? They pay you back in full. With interest. Thanks for watching. Have you ever had to cut ties with family to protect your peace? Would you have made the same call I did? Or handled it differently? Let me know in the comments. I'm reading everyone. And if you've ever had to choose respect over keeping the peace, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true stories about taking your power back.